Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Canon Podcast, your home on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network, for in-depth discussion on the lore, the High Republic, and the whole canon of the galaxy far, far away. Sorry about that little technical hiccup just there, but that's how the internet works. My name is Matthew, and I'm coming to you live from the new Star Wars Underworld North studio here in Toronto. As always, I am joined across the continent by your friend of mine, Mr. Joel Davis. Joel, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing great, and I just want to let our audience know that we on the Star Wars Ion Canon podcast support the SAG-AFTRA WGA strike that is still going on, and I believe I'm correct. We have a link to the Entertainment Community Fund in the description below, where you can donate and make sure. And we are not taking any contracts from any AMPT studios.
Absolutely. Their work is why we're here tonight and why we keep talking about canon and storytelling and both acting and writing and script writing. And, if it wasn't for film actors and film writers and script writers, Star Wars wouldn't happen. So, who's the real brains behind this operation? What are we talking about this week? Well, we're talking about politics and specifically of the New Republic, not just politics, also its possible history and future on page and screen. Canon so far. What do we know? What do we hope for? Does it restore the Galactic Republic or bring something new? All that and more on this week's episode of the Ion Canon Podcast. First up, going to do a few plugs. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Ion Canon Pod, EYEONCANONPOD. So going to not Twitter, X. I'm not even gonna. That's the last time I'm gonna do that. That sounded dirty coming out of my mouth. Twitter. It's called Twitter, guys. Just call it Twitter. Good grief. And here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel, we have YouTube memberships and super chats, and of course the Discord, Star Wars Underworld Discord. Joel, you have two things to plug. First off, talk about the Discord, and then talk about being on the flagship this past Thursday.
So as for things to plug, we had a game night last Friday. It was super fun. I'm going to tease that sometime in August before Ahsoka, I plan to set up a little Star Wars Rebels rewatch of a very important episodes, pretty much the last 4 episodes of season 4, to get ready for the Ahsoka series. So be on the lookout for that. And yes, we had a great time on the flagship show. We talked about what did we talk? Like a little Comic-Con. We talked about Ahsoka. We talked the strike. I gave a little theory that I think Sabine Wren is being set up to be the central character of the Filoni film, just based on some gut feelings I have, but we'll find out by the end of the Ahsoka series if I'm correct. And many more things. Go check it out. A lot of fun. Wish you were there because it would be awesome for more folks.
Thank you. So that's right here on the Star Wars Underworld YouTube channel. That being the flagship, we're the spinoff, the Ion Canon. We do little things different. That show definitely more talks about news and goes through news items. I'm sure there's room to make room for deeper conversations as well. We just go for it, take a topic, talk about it. Except for what we're going to do a little bit tonight. There's a bit of news we're going to get into as well, but always in terms of paper canon connections is our focus and deeper themes and ideas here at the Ion Canon Podcast. So with that, Jill, you have comment on your this week. Go for it with your point about generational Ahsoka hype.
Oh, yeah. So, I was talking to some friends of mine on the internet, as we do, and, we kind of got into the Ahsoka, and they're excited for the show. They're really hyped for Thrawn. This is a friend of mine who's a little younger than me, actually a lot younger. He's like 21. And I thought it was really cool that he didn't know Thrawn was a character from a book in 1991. He thought Thrawn was a character from Rebels. And, it's just kind of a fun reminder at the end of the day that the impact these shows have for their true target audience, which are people way younger than us, Rebels, Bad Batch, even, they're getting hyped for it as well. And it's just a cool reminder. It's like, oh yeah, Thrawn is, the people are like, oh, is Thrawn gonna be like the Kim Zahn version from 1991? It's like, they only know this character. Some younger people than us know this character just from Rebels, because that to them is their Star Wars, because that was the true demographic of the show. And I think just something older fans got to keep in mind. At the end of the day, most of the stuff, we're not the target audience for most of the stuff. We can enjoy it, and I think it's fun to enjoy, but like, we're not the essential target audience. It's younger kids for sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was just a fun convo and kind of a reminder. It's like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
this guy's
The
different.
year is 2023. People who were born in the year 2000 have mostly graduated university. What a
That's true.
thought, right? What a thought.
I
Oh
know.
goodness. And so much less people who were born in the late 90s, when the Phantom Menace and the prequels came out. Yeah, I mean, what would they necessarily know about Thrawn? Even I might have been, I guess I was old enough maybe to pick up a novel and see what it was about, but yeah, I guess it wasn't, not everybody was old enough, or not, there are so many people who hadn't been born yet when those novels came out, to not know. Yeah, and that, yeah, they're encountering Thrawn for the first time. I mean, you're gonna have some interesting mix. Then you're gonna have interesting mix of perspectives on him already in Rebels, first of all, and then also, you're gonna have folks like you, Joel, who've read the novels, the original '90s novels, and had this response when he came into Rebels, and the first canons on novels of, okay, this is what we have before. Folks like me who knew Thrawn was in the zeitgeist, and folks like you and Catherine, I should shout out last week's episode.
We're
Was a
not that
really,
old though. We weren't
I
born
know,
in
I
90.
know,
We weren't
but
alive in 91.
no, but like people who were involved in reading the novels, and really, yeah, what I'm getting at. They're like
Yeah.
part of the conversation when those novels were probably the most towering thing in Star Wars for a good decade, maybe not that long, but a good chunk of time, even into during the prequels. It seems like those novels were still, yeah, the a pillar, if you will, of what Star Wars storytelling was. And I say past tense, unfortunately. There's folks like us who kind of came in back into Star Wars fandom later in life, around Anaheim 2015, and just as the canon changeover, and still getting excited about Thrawn, but it's a different experience. And then there's folks who didn't even, yeah, like your friends, really not having a sense that uh, this was some historic character figure in Star Wars lore, if you will. Like a historic figure is in the '90s novels are historic parts of the Star Wars fabric, and yeah, it's just one of those things where the canon reset in 2015 creates this freshness that I think is exciting. But I gather, yeah, like what you're hinting at, there are going to be folks who are going to have to say, hold on, my own expectations. Yeah, I mean, that's the classic question, right? Going into something, what are expectations, and what are the sources of those expectations? How true is Filoni going to be to this strong character? I mean, that's the question. We
Yeah.
dealt with last week, but yeah, if you have any further thoughts, Joel.
Yeah, I mean, I think about Filoni, it's like, I don't know how old he is. I think he's like Gen X. He's certainly older than us.
Yeah.
But he would be of the right age, and kind of what the interviews I get of, he is.
Mhm.
I would not be surprised, and someone on a forum I was reading said this, where it's like, he is of the right age, where it's like the Thrawn trilogies kind of were the sequels that weren't. They were the sequel trilogy, for lack of a better term. I mean, in terms of here's the continuing adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. What happened next?
Right.
I think the reason why Dave was putting in Thrawn is not just because I think he's I'm Dave, I can do whatever I want. Like, no, I definitely think he generally likes those books and those characters. Obviously, I think he's smart enough to know, like, I can't do a beat for beat, nor should I think he's gonna try.
No.
But I do think he is of that generation, just of, yeah, this is kind of the sequel trilogy that was. And I'm not saying, Filoni hates the sequel trilogy of Day, but I'm very much of like, he is of that generation that is going to influence his storytelling just as much as being under George's tutelage. But, as I always say, if Filoni's really adhering to George's vision, why is he using Thrawn? George could care less about Thrawn.
True.
So, yeah, that's just kind of
That's
something
your
I
point.
always.
I mean, Thrawn and the George Lucas vision. That's a whole.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, we touched on it last week a little bit, but yeah, I mean, he's definitely shown respect. My sense is he's shown a lot of respect for the character, even as he's free to explore. And even Zahn himself, I mean, Zahn was gonna respect his own character. Uh, Free to explore. Maybe that accounts for some of the differences between Rebels and the canon trilogy and the canon six novels. Is Filoni's being free to explore more situations and different situations, and it would go back to the whole protagonist versus villain question. But um, yeah, it's a respect, but also a freedom to do something different, and definitely throwing them in live action. If we talk about medium and message, it's a whole other medium, a whole other experience seeing this character in live action, even than
Oh,
animated, than in a novel. So
oh,
uh,
totally.
yeah, it's funny. This guy keeps on. I mean, this guy. We're gonna get to him in a minute, in a little bit. This guy, yeah. What's with our podcast and blue characters? It's the blue theme. It's this stuff here.
I
This,
like
this
blue. I mean, blue is my favorite
the
color,
Jedi
and
Temple Archives.
I mean,
Markian
blue is
Ro,
my
Thrawn.
favorite character. So
Yeah,
that's kind of the reason why I actually liked Thrawn when I was little. It's like be blue. I
yeah.
like blue. So
It's a nice color.
there.
It's a nice color.
It's a good color. So,
Maybe give some Aayla Secura some love. I don't know. Uh, why not?
yeah.
All right, let's move on to some some High Republic news, because we're the home of the High Republic here on the Star Wars Underworld Podcast Network. I just claimed that. I don't know. It wasn't bestowed on me. I just went for it. You know how you do. Nope, that's the wrong thing. That's what I wanted to do. I'm gonna actually not confuse myself there by doing that. So Leslie Headland speaking on the Dagobah Dispatch, but this is written in the Investment Bulletin. So the Dagobah Dispatch is Entertainment Weekly's Star Wars podcast, so they have access to people, because that's the super legit publication. Investment Bulletin, they've been around. They do their homework. Kind of did a bit of a write up on this podcast episode, on this interview that like, give a look at. And Leslie Headland came on, so did Amanda Stenberg and others. But Leslie was talking about how during the time of the Acolyte, the galaxy, of course, is in a time of peace, because I mean that's the era, and I'll get to that in a minute. But a quote that stood out, and Joel, you found this quote stand out a lot too as well. This is from Leslie Headland speaking. I think what makes this show different and interesting is that it's from the perspective of the bad guys or the villains of Star Wars. And this is important, but why the peacetime is important, and how it's hard to make a Star Wars story where there isn't a major war going on. And so you have the villains. These are the people who are using the Force in their own way, dipping into the darker side of the Force, and are doing it without being sanctioned by the larger institution, which in this case is the Jedi. And I think that Star Wars is always about some version of the underdog versus the institution. Now, before I go into that directly, I thought about the galaxy being the time of peace, and it brought up those things that spark in the obvious. Of course, the Nihil threat has to have been neutralized by then, has to have been dealt with somehow, such that at least they aren't creating havoc in the galaxy the way they have been, they had been. Oh, I guess only 50 years, 100 years before this time. Both the attack on the hyperspace routes, and the attack on Valo, and then the destruction of Starlight, and then everything with the Nameless and the Leveler, and everything we'll see in Phase 3. Clearly, there's some. I mean, it's stating the obvious, but it raises that question that Joel you've brought up is what does that resolution look like? What does that return to a peaceable state in the galaxy look like?
Peace.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe interestingly enough, I mean, that's the thing, is that by the time of the Phantom Menace, of course it has to. The biggest thing that Chancellor has to deal with, the Jedi have to deal with, are these little trade disputes. Little they know those trade disputes spark the greatest, the biggest conflict in the history of the galaxy. At least the most important one, or well, not I don't know about that, but one of the most impactful ones that leads to the rise of the
The
Empire. That's what.
deadliest in 1,000 years. So
Yeah, there we go. So I'm not exaggerating the whole thing. The Clone Wars is what I'm talking about, guys. But yeah, it's. I wonder why. I'm gonna think about why I that struck me. So yeah, of course, because we're in it. Because I'm reading Phase 2. I'm reading Cataclysm.
I can maybe explain why. I have this.
Like
I have
why
this
that strikes me as surprising to think about. Go ahead.
I've always seen like I've sort of realized this when I'm doing another podcast for something else, that you have the High Republic era. It's this era of time that we've historically just set aside. But then we have the High Republic storyline, which is the books and the conflict against the Nile. Acolyte is in the era of the High Republic, this historical event, or this historical era, which is, the historians of Star Wars say, High Republic, 300 to 90 BY. But it's not part of the High Republic storyline, the storyline of the Jedi versus the Nile. Right. So maybe
these books here.
So it's sort of like you kind of have to separate. You have the era, and then this overarching storyline, which a bunch of books and comics have been covering for the past 3-4 years.
Yeah.
So I feel like getting to more what I want to see is we have stories in the era, but they have nothing to do with this big sweeping storyline that you got to read a bunch of books and comics to piece together, and something gets a little confusing, at least for me. So maybe that is why that kind of like you associate High Republic with this storyline.
Yeah, with the conflict with the Nile. I mean, that's the war. If the prequels is the Clone Wars and the originals is the Rebellion, and then the sequels with the First Order, High Republic has been with the Nile.
But this is sort of out of the storyline that's sort of been weaved so far, and it's just set in the era, but it's not part of this storyline that we've kind of crafted.
That's a good point, and you're gonna have to do some mind gymnastics about that. But also, I mean, again, it raises the interesting question that you have too: is what does that piece look like? What does that thing look? Does it look like again the Jedi having all retreated into the temple? Being the institution that sanctions how the Force is used also makes me think of, okay, what about all the other Force religions on Jedha and whatnot? And then, of course, we have these Sith-like characters. I think they've been confirmed as Sith. Emmanuel Sundberg's character being the underdog versus the institution. Joel, you found that quote significant. What about that? What'd you say?
I mean, I feel like we've seen a lot of that kind of mindset for Star Wars in the last 10 years, especially just with the kind of authors and creatives we're getting.
I mean, even since the prequels, it was that kind of sense of.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're just, the be careful. It's not really anti-institution so much as to be careful. These institutions can easily be taken over by evil. But I do think also, and I was reading a fun Tumblr blog about this, I also think this kind of is indicative of Leslie Headland and Ewan Filoni's. They're Gen Xers. They're not boomers writing fantasy. They are, like Lucas was writing a fantasy from a boomer perspective for millennials and Gen Z. Gen Xers are a little bit more, and I don't want to, put paint over every Gen Xer, but this is kind of the general mood. There is sort of that they kind of see the world in a little more gray. There is no, the Jedi can't be pure good. Like there's got to be something, wrong. Even someone as, there can't be someone as good as Yoda. It's like, even Yoda probably got to have some flaw, or like, even the bad guys got to have something sympathetic about them. So, I think it's kind of also, where George was a little bit more heavier on good and evil at the end of the day. The Gen Xers are a little bit more, there's a lot of gray in the world. Nothing is pure black or white. So it just makes me excited for when millennials and Gen Zers do start taking over Star Wars storytelling. It's like, what are we going to bring to the table? But I just think that's kind of indicative of kind of the storytellers taking over. You see a lot of like, just the stories we're getting now with like a lot of the good communal aid projects are never done really by institutions, more just local groups, communities, individuals making good decisions, that sort of thing. So, I just think it's sort of that's sort of we've seen this philosophy kind of unfold the last couple of years. Leslie Headland just saying it outright, where she does believe that Star Wars is MO, which is somewhat true. When when the bad guys are the Empire, but this time, there is no Empire. There is just the Republic.
Yeah,
and the Jedi.
there's the Empire in utero, and that is the late Republic, especially is Maul saying, "Oh, look around you." The Jedi have already fallen. The Empire, the Republic's already fallen. This is gonna be interesting when we get to this in about 20 minutes or whatever. Talking about the New Republic, and I'm gonna have that in my mind, this generational thing, because it even came up recently. I'm about a third of the way through Cataclysm, and I think is it? It's not Chancellor Molo. It's I think it could be Monarch Alberon. One of the kind of Irem or Arano officials talking about how the Jedi, they're benevolent, but I think Monarch Alberon is debating with his daughter Ziri, and how Charles Roy and Enya are here to help, and Monarch's all, I've been around, a bit grizzled now, like Gen X is now, frankly, being around a little bit, being a bit more grizzled, and seeing how boomers came in with their institutions and said, we're going to use them to serve us, and how they, millennials experience that a lot. That's also a millennial story. The difference is realism and cynicism versus turning and saying, okay, now we need more aspirational, hopeful stories. And both Star franchises have wrestled with this constantly, right? If you want to look at, here's two odd parallels here. Is what this makes me think of is when Ron Moore was on Voyager, was writing Star Trek Voyager, and it was so much the Federation and its ideals, and they can we're out in this whole unknown situation, but we're going to hold on to our ideals because that's all we have to go on. We're going to come together, and as this institution, as the representatives of Starfleet and the Federation out in the Delta Quadrant, we're going to stick to what we know, and it'll serve us well. And Ron Moore's like, forget that. I'm going to go and retell this story from the 80s about when these Cylons rose up and obliterated humanity, and how that pushes everyone out into a descent into chaos. And that seems like the more realistic story. And so he preached one of my favorite shows of all time, the 2000s Battlestar Galactica, and the birth of gritty realist TV in that era. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit, and this is a generation later. Leslie Headland, it makes me wonder. I'm always for that. I'm always for stories like that. Revenge of the Sith, again, has a seed of that questioning of the institutions at their core. I think Star Wars always has. Turning that question onto, that's the thing. George goes halfway. He turns it onto the Jedi for a minute, shines the spotlight on the Jedi for a minute, and the Republic for a minute, but really it's Palpatine. Really it's the Sith pulling all the strings. And
Anakin is making bad decisions.
And Anakin's making bad personal choices. But this is sounding like it's going to explore, I hope it explores the ambiguity. In the way I think High Republic does a little bit. I don't know if that's entirely what High Republic is about, but except for someone like Keith Trennis, we'll get to in a very short second. Saying, okay, the incapacity of the Jedi to go and actually be the guardians of peace and justice and help the galaxy and preserve goodness and good order in society. This is going to be interesting. It's the underdog institution. This may be the closest thing to get to something called Gray Jedi. if you will, in terms of people who just taking it, upholding. Okay, I'm all for stories that uphold a point of view of suspending my moral disbelief, especially if she's going to make this so connected to my favorite thing in Star Wars right now is High Republic, where I don't necessarily have to suspend my moral disbelief. Um, so yeah, that's the one thing. But I'm a little. It again raises a question: is she gonna turn the Jedi into villains here? Is that going to go too far? I think she's going to be more responsible than that. I think she understands the story more deeply than that. But
I think she's a good writer too. So it's like, trust me, I feel like when people turn the Jedi into outright villains, they're most of the time also just not very good writers. I'm sorry. Like it's like I just don't think you're like I think if you're a clever enough writer, you can do that, but make it interesting enough for like, oh, okay, well you kinda have a point.
I mean Yoda like Yoda and Anakin on the pillows, right? I mean it's not that Yoda's being he's just I don't know, he's just stuck in this sense of detachment, right? And what and how that leads Anakin astray, right? Turn the other way. Interestingly, so I'll put this up here. There's a rediscovery. I mean, so Star Trek is this amazing. If you want to know, Joel, your answer about what happens when millennials and Gen Z start taking over, we start writing more aspirational, hopeful stories again. We start going back to.
Oh no, I agree. I've seen some shows made by millennial showrunners. They're like very aspirational.
Yeah,
so.
we start going back to mid Trek and old Trek and say, hey, we're the hopeful, not so much the institution in its own sense, but this is the thing about Voyager, for example, and I'm going here a little bit, is it's not so much the institution itself, it's the people in this specific situation having their wits about them. And it just, with Strange New Worlds and Discovery and Lower Decks even, they've started to really hone in on that as well. And so there's room for that in Star Wars. I mean, maybe I'll say Star Wars never lost it in its own sense, but
I wouldn't say that. Like I don't want to paint, like Rebels was showrun by Dave Filoni, and yet Rebels has a very, it's a little bittersweet because you lose Ezra, but it's like the people of Lothal join together and they take on Thrawn, and Thrawn loses because of space whales. Same with Resistance, the people of that station join up and kick the First Order's butt. Even at the Rise of Skywalker, the people rise up against the Empire or the Final Order, and it's like, no, we ain't dealing with Palpatine. But again, I'll just say one more thing about the generational thing before I get too sidetracked here. Is like, that Tumblr post I was reading, also mentioned, George made the prequels not for the Gen Xers, he made it for Gen Zers and Millennials. So, and that's another big reason why, when you see a lot of people who don't like the prequels, with a few exceptions. Again, don't want to paint every Gen Xer with. I mean, I know a few who do love the prequels too, but a lot of them are the prequel. A lot of prequel haters, I know, they are of that era age. Like I know. I mean, the guy I was talking to though, who loved Rebels and Thrawn, they weren't a prequel hater. They could know prequels, they got problems at the films and stuff, but they didn't outright despise them. It's like, how dare it? It's just like, the dialogue and the acting and maybe some story plot could be stronger. But but the people who didn't quite get the prequels just fundamentally as well, they're definitely of that age, and they're also kind of of Filoni and Leslie Headland's age for sure.
Of course,
I don't want to make
Filoni and Leslie get the prequels. I mean, that's true, but
or they get them, but they think but the argument is they kind of twist them as well for like I guess we talked about like the Jedi thing, which we've gone over before. I don't want to rehash old arguments and whatnot, but certainly kind of interpret things maybe a little differently than what George was going for, or what even new generations might go for as well.
George was totally the Marty McFly. You're not ready for it, but your kids will love it.
Yeah,
there you go. Or I guess your younger siblings and your cousins, or whatever. But there you go. Yeah, there are. All right. So moving on, San Diego Comic-Con. So mentioned on Friday there was the Lucasfilm Publishing panel, and it wasn't that much groundbreaking announcements. I mean, they usually save those for Celebration and another city Comic Con called New York that I will be going to. So yeah, there wasn't that much, but well, there was things that stood out to me. If I can actually get this, I forgot to put these up here. A few comic book covers, and I'll start with this one here. Move that out of the way. That's of course cover of number 2, Shadows of Starlight. Uh, who's doing the art for that? Let me just see this here. Marika Cresta, right on. And of course, Mr. Charles Soule. That's, I mean, and that struck me, of course, because that's that would be Elzar with with Starlight flowing background, really just evocative of what this short run comic is going to be. It's going to be 4 issues tracking the year from the fall of Starlight to when we pick up beginning phase 3, and so just really evocative of we see the past, we see what happened at the end of phase 1. Starlight Beacon is crumbling and sinking, but Stellan's looking forward. He's standing, trying to move forward on that rock. I believe that's Stellan. Oh no, it's probably Elzar. Sorry, Stellan's dead. Oh, it's Elzar. And yeah, he's trying to move forward and stand up, and has his lightsaber drawn. And yeah, I thought it was very striking. Another one, I think the most striking of the two. Let's see if we can pop that one up there. This, of course, is High Republic #1 by Kevin Scott, thought by Ario Anindito. In this cover, Phil Noto, of course, Phil Noto cover. I'm assuming, and what was really interesting. I mean, so you have Keeve with the long hair here, standing up, face forward, ready to take on the galaxy. Is that Tarek or Sarah? We don't know. And Lorna D. We don't know if they're in cahoots now or what's happening, but but what I found again really striking is how it continues the pattern from phase 1, the phase 1 run, with 3 characters, and at the bottom you have this frame with the ship or something in the circle. I mean, both of these covers really speak of and give the feel of we are picking up right where we left off. This is very much tied in together, as we know it would be, but really important, helpful visual cues to see where these characters are and where the situation is. Again, very curious to see if Lorna is working with the Jedi. I mean, after everything she's been through, maybe she's not exactly on Markian's good side right now. So yeah, it's that was exciting, and so those stood out to me in Comic-Con. I don't know, Joel, if anything stood out to you from Comic-Con, or any of what these covers speak to you.
No, not really. Although I think talking about, honestly, what speaks to me now is the conversation we've been having. It's sort of like when High Republic Phase 3 ends and how this ends, how aspirational is the ending? Because again, I feel like there's kind of 2 mindsets with High Republic that I've always noticed. There is where we are making this beeline to the prequels, or this storyline is just a storyline. And maybe if you kind of like big picture, we can see like, oh, these things here and there for sure. But it's still a standalone storyline at the end of the day. And so you will have a more aspirational ending of like, we did it. It's like, yay, Nihil versus Jedi, and we won. Where it's like, we're not going to like, what have we done? It's like, dun, dun, dun. Like, I think it might be more, this is an aspirational time, and this is an aspirational storyline that can stand on its own. It's like almost a mini franchise that's just part of a larger universe. We don't know.
I'm bringing this up again because I keep bringing this one character up every single time. And I just realized what Keeve Trennis and why she's so important I think it's going to have this grand aspirational ending. It's going to be similar maybe to the ending of Phantom Menace in a way. It's going to have this grand aspirational, happy, we did it ending, but there's going to be this undercurrent of, and it's going to be more overt, the Keeve leaving the Order, whatever that may look like, or she hasn't been made a master yet, so she hasn't left the Order yet, but definitely on her way out. And there's this sense of all is not right, even if it feels right for so many people, looks right. She's going to be the one, like Qui-Gon, to know, like Ahsoka, ultimately, to know things are not what they ought to be. And yeah, I mean, it'd be to see if there's some sort of lineage there. What kind of her dialogue with Yoda, for example, the Yoda is always able to hold both those at once. I just talked about how he really doesn't in that moment with Anakin, but he's able to hold both the sense of the long sense of history, the long view of history, and how things ebb and flow, and there's no such thing as a golden age. And so when we do think there is, enjoy what is good and right about it, but also be all it's not all going to be a bed of roses in the end. So Kiev, I think, is going to be that remembrance, that reminder, just knowing her story, even if it doesn't necessarily say anything. I mean, it's great that it's a comic book. We're going to be able to see on her face. I know Gavin Scott will have notes for Ario being all she has this expression on her face or something to suggest not a fan of this retreat, not a fan of this. Well, I mean, maybe even closer to the end of Attack of the Clones, although that's even more overt. This really triumphalist ending, and you have Bail and you have Yoda, Bail pounding his fist on the concrete there, and you have Yoda saying, "The Shroud of the Dark Side's fallen, begun the Clone War has." And I wonder if there's going to be this bittersweet note that is always driving us towards. So maybe, Joel, to answer your question, it probably is going to be both at the same time.
Yeah, I'm curious, man. We got us a year to go, so let's see.
There we go. I mean, like a year and a half, I think, like mid 2025. They're really going to stretch it out, thankfully.
I know.
So I guess it's no, it's 2 years. It's gonna be. I think they're going to stretch it out for 2 years, thankfully.
I hope so. Yeah. This is kind of something I've been thinking about, though.
Mm-hmm.
Once the storyline is over, I kind of hope that the authors are allowed to do one and done books again, because I'm reading Rise of the Red Blade, and that's a one and done story. But so far, I've been loving it. It's been great. So I'm missing the one and dones and maybe some trilogies.
One and dones in Star Wars specifically, because speaking of one and dones, if nobody's noticed, this right here is my little Easter egg. So Dom and I each have an Easter egg in the background. Nice. You can't really see Dom's because it's kind of washed out in the glare. This right here is The Endless Vessel by Charles Soule, and it's an independent standalone. It's not in any IP or anything. So they can do it. They do it, and they want to, for them to actually explore in the sandbox is a great point. For the Luminous authors to do that too.
Yeah, I have. I'll be very curious to see the one and done that come out in the next 10 years, and so once some of these storylines are over, and kind of we gotta do a little clean house.
One and done's in the High Republic era, or just general?
In general, man. Like I feel like Charles Soule has not been allowed to do a one and done novel. Actually, I don't think he's ever done a one and done novel for Star Wars outside of High Republic. So I'd love to see him get a shot.
I mean, he's also doing the comic run.
That's true. So he's a busy guy.
And we know Kevin's doing more like Tales from the Death Star.
That's true.
Things like that. But I mean, this is sort of a one and done. I think maybe Don and I have been talking about this, or somebody, just do a Kiev novel 30 years later. Master Kiev leaves the Order. What's that about? And make that kind of like an epilogue. And we know Charles is writing Quest or Trials of the Jedi, the final novel, to really close the whole thing off.
I mean, my dream one and done is when the Mandoverse is over and the Thrawn arc's done, and then they do like a Rise of Snoke novel that like ties in like the Aftermath trilogy to the Mandoverse, to the sequel, and kind of connects the threads that maybe the shows and books don't. So like, we'll do a little cleanup, a little ironing out canon, some of the just kind of just make it a little smoother. Yeah,
and there's only one person to write that novel, in my opinion. Tommy Stella. No, I'm just kidding. Tommy, get your boss on that. So, I don't know, Joel. Who do you think should write that book?
Which also would be good. And Christopher did Shadow of the Sith quite brilliantly.
Yeah.
And he hasn't done anything in years, but the dream would always be get James Lucino back
Yeah,
for one last round. Snoke.
that's not a bad shout.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean, do we think Chuck Wendig? No.
Nah, it doesn't seem like he's been back in Lucasfilm for a while.
Yeah. Well, there might be some generational change over there too. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Fair enough. There's also at San Diego. There's some more reveals about the High Republic character encyclopedia that does span all 3 phases. Also, a Rebellion reference book, some of House Organa. So there's a whole write up on StarWars.com. We may have guests pop in there who were there just to chat about it, but for now, yeah, there just wasn't anything really to write home about except for I like those covers, so I'm gonna show them. I want to talk about them. Alrighty, do you have anything more to add about San Diego or?
Nope, that was it. Because of the Hollywood stuff, wasn't much going on.
True.
And mostly, I feel like it's just stuff we kind of already knew about High Republic.
Yeah, there was the Outlaws panel, and so stay tuned. We are gonna. I'll mention that at the end, but that is jogging my mind about some things. So I need to actually look at the actual panel, but there's some things in there that are kind of curious about for what we can talk about here at the Ion Canon Podcast. All right, speaking of talking about stuff, the Ion Canon Podcast, we've hinted at it already. The New Republic, a New Republic. What is this New Republic? I think it's a dumb name. Who calls themselves the New Republic? Who calls themselves the New Republic? But it's not like the New Democratic Party.
I feel like in some way that's a political. Well, that's a New Republic, a name that goes back to 1991's Tim Zahn, heir to the Empire. So blame him for that.
I don't think it's ever. It's something the Templin Institute needs to hopefully address. What kind of dumb name is New Republic? Maybe that's not really. I don't know. Is that confirmed that legally that's the name of the institution of the state?
I think so. I mean, both in Legends and canon, because it's sort of like, well, the New Republic's also a magazine, too. So,
anyways, tell us about the New Republic, Joel.
Yes, the new Republic. Sorry, I just had like that Rise of Skywalker moment, like a new empire. It is called the New Republic, although they shorthand it for Republic later on when it starts being a little less new. But I can kind of see why. It's sort of a political kind of machination of like, hey, we're not the Republic that fell and became the Empire. We're the New Republic. Apparently, there's even an ideology called a New Republican, which you mentioned in Andor, I saw. So New Republic, it's rises from the ashes of the Empire. Once Mon Mothma adjourns the Senate after Palpatine's dead, because that was always sort of the plan of once Palpatine's dead, we get back the Senate and we kind of get planets involved.
The Alliance to Restore the Republic is what it's called.
Right. So it is what they can call the Alliance to Restore the Republic. The Rebel Alliance always molded itself as almost a government in exile kind of a situation, as Palpatine essentially initiated a coup against the Republic. I'm sure eventually maybe they dropped. It's sort of like, countries like France call themselves the Fifth French Republic.
True.
That's their official institutional name, but they just call themselves France.
Yeah.
Although that's because France has had a lot of republics.
But that's a good parallel, though. I mean, you really want to remember the fourth and the third, and I don't know how much they really want.
that gave up after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Third had Napoleon the Third before he became emperor.
Yeah. So you really want to remember the Third Republic?
No. That was the third was after Napoleon. I think. I always forget. Fourth was after World War II.
I know the fourth was a peaceful transition between that, and De Gaulle wanted to change the constitution. So anyway, that's a tangent. New Republic.
But I think that's another reason why they call themselves the New Republic, because how much of that's one thing we don't know, how much of that old Republic Constitution did they just dust off, change the name, Emperor back to Chancellor, and then here you go, install our new system back online.
We'll get there in a second. We keep going.
Let's see. I'm trying to think of where to start. So New Republican story. Let's talk about New Republican stories. I keep saying New Republican, New Republic in stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, the trajectory of the New Republic kind of is one of those things where I talk about canon responsibility, if that should be a thing. I don't know. There's a debate on that for sure. Of Force Awakens very much affects New Republic stories now and forever. Because in Force Awakens they go kablooey. They exploded because they didn't think the First Order was a big deal. They just thought, oh, look at the guys dressing up them stormtroopers. They're just silly, crazy people who like to dress up as stormtroopers. We don't need to take them seriously.
Yeah.
And then they have this giant
They're cosplay fascists.
Cosplay fascists who have a secret weapon that will destroy us all, and secret fleet of doom. So kind of there, Bloodline's the first one to kind of institute kind of why the New Republic was the way it was, which is kind of interesting because I've been thinking about this, and Bloodline and Mandoverse kind of are taking very drastic different approaches, which I can think can be reconciled. I don't think it's irreconcilable, but sort of like Bloodline plays it as Empire Fall the year after Endor, and New Republic is so successful. There's so much peace that they get a little too. We did it, boys. We did it. Yep. Yeah, we don't need to worry about galaxy. Like we did it. There's some good times. 20, 30 years of good times. Then Mandoverse kind of is playing. It's like New Republic is having trouble controlling systems. You got pirate nations and warlords and independent sectors. And I guess you could play it off as kind of, this is the early years. Still technically is, and then later on they get their footing. It's like, okay, we got some good times once once Thrawn's gone eventually and stuff. So
that could be just a thought. I mean, that could be the big turning point. Is we finally really did it. We got rid of Thrawn. But also you do see, I mean, you see that tension already. I mean, the thing is, the Mandoverse is just looking in a different direction, looking at a different part of the galaxy. I want to see Ahsoka with Mon Mothma and what's his name?
Carson Teva?
No, well, I mean, Carson Teva is getting to my point, but the dad, the Hosnian senator, what's his name?
Oh yeah.
Xiono. I want to see them have that kind of attitude of, we kind of did it. We're doing what we can, and we're doing great at what we can do. And that I want to see.
Hera's definitely going to have that moment for sure. It seems like in the trailer.
Yeah, and then what Carson Teva really represents, I mean, is this? I mean, what I really wanted to see in Rangers of the New Republic, for example, is this Leia type of contact where, I mean, we saw it in that moment with Carson and what's her face. I'm completely blanking on her name because she's not in the series anymore because she got canceled. Wasn't able to read the room, but
Cara Dune.
Cara Dune, yeah. Carson and Cara Dune, he's saying, okay, there's a threat out here. People aren't taking it seriously, and I do think. I mean, we saw it again in season 3 a little bit, but
I mean, Carson Teva seems to be going to be buddies next season.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting thing. But yeah, we definitely, it's a bigger galaxy now that the Empire is gone. Is part of it too. So anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. You're right. It is a bigger galaxy. I'm actually kind of curious how much Mon Mothma is actually going to be in the show, because that was another thing we talked about on the main podcast last week. It's like she talks about Genevieve O'Reilly. I'm going to say Mon Mothma, but I know Genevieve O'Reilly is going to be like, it was nice that John and Dave wanted me to join in for a little bit in their Mandoverse, and the way she said it's like, it doesn't sound like she's in the show that much compared to Andor. Probably cameo, maybe a scene or two. Probably at best that one scene. I mean, I hope maybe for a little more, but at best probably that one scene of like, we can't do much for you, Hera. Sorry. So yeah, that is something that just storytelling wise is interesting. We don't have a lot of New Republic characters. I mean, we're getting them now. We get Carson. I guess Ahsoka. Technically, we have Hera because she's definitely in charge.
Yeah.
So we got Zeb. Zeb's technically a New Republic character, although Zeb wasn't really doing much.
We saw him for 2 seconds, and for a second, I couldn't even recognize him. So
I know. Although he integrated quite well. So we are finally getting more point New Republic characters. Which I think in some ways is equivalent to a lot of Star Wars storytelling, where I think for the most part it's always been less. If Star Wars is the institution and the underdogs, it's sort of like, even when the institutions aren't evil, like the Empire, it's always more like, and this has always kind of been the case, where it's like you got the good characters like Carson Teva and Hera and Cara Dune, where it's like they're the helpful ones, and then you get rando bureaucrat number 100, who's kind of just, I'm just doing my job. I don't have time. Or even when you got more powerful characters, like in Legends, it was always Admiral Akbar. He's one of the good. He's good, so he's kind of the only person who can do anything right. And then when some other military commander is like, he's not Admiral Akbar. He's not saying it's a trap. He's leading us into traps. Use Star Trek as an example. It's sort of like, oh, those no good admirals, they're keeping Captain Kirk from dealing with Captain Kirk.
Incompetent Commodores. Commodores.
Only Captain Kirk and the crew know what's going on.
It's funny.
So yeah, it's just something that's always sort of been there. I think they definitely, Mandoverse has played with that, but also because Mandoverse is not a political show. It's not a political drama. It's just,
well, The Mandalorian isn't, but.
And Ahsoka probably won't be either. Ahsoka's probably more samurai, kind of adventure, mysticism, where it's just kind of like the New Republic's only there because Hera's kind of like, hey, help us out. And New Republic's like, yeah, a TIE fighter is not a problem. Thrawn is like, but yeah. So, it is, again, that thing of like, New Republic has been affected by the choices of Force Awakens and the sequels, and kind of, this is where we talk about, if we want to honor canon, then we have to deal with the consequences. Do you want to step in?
So a few thoughts there, and the thought of how to reconcile this discrepancy, if you will. I mean, what Bloodline really fleshes out with Claudia Gray, standalone novel by a High Republic author, by the way, which very good. I want to see her do more standalone novels because she's the best.
Lost Stars too.
Yeah, there we go. What that really sets up is this sense of, when just in crafting this new constitution, very strong sense of, oh no, we do not want to do what the Empire did. We do not want to have a standing army. We do not want to have such strong executive power. We need to have a lot more of it in check by the legislature, basically a parliament at that point. And it's not the chancellor; it's the first senator. And there's a separate election for it, and that's and Leia's running for that. But here's where that shakes out is there's this populist party that is small government, actually. It's and Leia and Mon Mothma are part of the populist party. They're not called parties; they're factions that are saying more localized, planetary, subsidiarity. Is that the word? Yeah, is this idea in a lot of social thought about and Catholic social teaching as well, about local focus and let local people make the decisions that affect them most. And to say, we're not going to have such strong central authority and strong executive authority, and then you have the centrists like Ransom Casterfo, who looks at the Empire and says, well, at least they were organized and they were efficient. I'm not actually
good empire. A good
empire. Well, no, like he's honest about how they aren't, and ends up being a very close ally to Leia. But then you have someone like Clarice Sidian, right, who is full on starting the First Order and goes out into the end, or the Amexine station and all that stuff. Not at all afraid of recovering what happened with the Empire. And so that in there is, I mean, what we're seeing here with the New Republic being so hesitant to respond. Yeah, in part it's a lack of will, similar to Keeve Trennis fighting against the lack of will that she encounters centuries before. Some kind of lack of will, the 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 concern, when in Rogue One, where the news of the Death Star, and so the Death Star, how can we fight against this thing? We can't go, and then it takes Jin and then Admiral Raddus and them to go. There's a similar theme, right, with Leia and Poe Dameron and them leaving to form the Resistance. It's a little more complicated when you think, oh yeah, there was this Empire, and this is the Sith guy, and he raised a Grand Army of the Republic, and that has never gone well for the galaxy. A Grand Army of the Republic has never gone well for the galaxy, and clearly this is what happened. And so even going to the Battle of Jakku, there was, I mean, Mon Mothma wanted to mobilize a fleet to take out the Imperial remnant who had been left behind at Jakku. And this is, again, Chuck Wendig's novel. And it took 2 or 3 votes in the Senate to actually authorize this temporary fleet to be raised to go and fight this battle. And it just exemplifies this extreme caution, extreme concern over being bound too much to well, I mean, it kind of goes back to really what Star Wars is. It's the people in the institution. That's the difference. It's the people in the institution are questioning the efficacy of the institution, and so they want to make sure it's not overstepping it, because there's the fears once you give too much to it, without the promises of subsidiarity, and that's the big question. And I call myself a bad social democrat here because once we let state institutions just dictate everything and regulate everything and organize and be the source for everything, bureaucracy becomes what becomes the source of our well-being. That's the concern. And so to say, no, bureaucracy is good for coordination, for standards, for taking on corporations that don't meet those standards, but corporations are not going to care about local communities either. They're going to be caring about their profits and expansion. And so it's all well and good if a state institution is willing to ensure the well-being of communities on the ground. You have to do that by listening to the stakeholders and communities on the ground, and not by having these one-size-fits-all solutions that large bureaucracies like to have. And so I think there's a very strong, especially militarized bureaucracies that want to have a standing army. And so there's this, and especially this reticence to say, no, we're not the Empire. We're not going to do that. Maybe this is the self-congratulation thing. We're not the Empire. We're not going to do that. We're going to look inside, do what we can, shore up our resources. And, the thing I keep coming back to in Bloodline, or not Bloodline, Life Debt, with Mon Mothma and Leia. Leia wants to go out and basically take guerrilla action against, I forget who, but have that kind of loose organization that the rebellion had. And Mon Mothma says, this isn't a rebellion anymore. We're forming a government. And I keep coming back to that because it raises the issue of what this new stage is and what this newfound freedom has become with this government on Chandrila that is actually able to maybe do some good for the galaxy and bring out some democracy. It is ultimately inept, and that is the tension that leads, of course, to its own destruction. But it's understandable, and Claudia Gray, especially Chuck Wendig, especially, do a good job of fleshing all that out.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, I always find it sort of funny. Someone made a joke about Bloodline where it's like, you have the populist and the centrist side with the fascist. It's like, oh, what are you trying to say there? Centrist side with fascist.
Which isn't necessarily true. I mean, that's the thing is centrists could be. I mean, you could be both, right? And that's the funny thing with Star Wars. The centrists could be fascists, or they could be social democrats. And I mean, get Ransom Casterfo, he probably is more of a social democrat, and I found myself empathizing with him and and kind of seeing his point. Not Clarice Indian, but anyway.
I actually do wonder how many of those centrist planets actually did secede to the First Order, because I feel like not a lot of them did at the end of the day. Right. And I've always read source books that said no, a lot of them actually did. What were they getting at? I also find it funny about the populist thing and like local governments, where it's not a true equivalent to states' rights, because states' rights do what?
Right.
But I do feel like Leia is not just planet's right to do what? You know what I'm saying? Like certain America's states' rights. Florida's right to do what, essentially. Like, I think she'd be like, no, planets just don't have the right to do whatever they want. They should also be democratized as well.
I mean, the closer equivalent there is cities' rights. It's Houston's right to have green energy when the state of Texas doesn't let them, or whatever. Bring that up.
Although, cities start doing some shady stuff too, or banning.
They do. That's true, but it's if a city wants to desegregate, and but the state isn't letting them, or a business wants to desegregate and the state isn't letting them, then the interstate commerce clause, comes in and says, no, wait a minute, you have to desegregate. So yeah. But I definitely see. I mean, that's the classic example, right? Is
right
with JFK and the Commerce Clause and the horse. So yeah, I know my American history. There we go. I know a little bit.
But you're right. The whole thing about the New Republic, especially in Legends more, and I think that's just because of the prequels. Because again, in Legends because in the New Republic and Legends, we had definitely a lot of those stories of like, the rebellion kind of learning to be a government, but also like now it's coming with those sorts of challenges, or like you get more characters in the New Republic faction who are like, wait a minute, you're not just good, you're just kind of out for your own power. You're trying to backstab Akbar to get his job. Right. So like, what's going on here? You just thought we were all the good guys, because we all worked for the same good guy faction.
Magically,
that's a kind of a side plot of like there's some political intrigue in the New Republic during the Thrawn campaign, and Thrawn kind of using that to his advantage in the book. In the aftermath, especially because we have the prequels, I think New Republic very much is cautious of like, we don't want to be like the Empire. We don't want to, having that demilitarizing should be step one, because that's what got us into this trouble in the first place. So you could make a really good argument that the Republic truly died the minute the Clone Army came into position. That's sort of the end of Attack of the Clones, where you hear the Imperial March and everyone's just kind of looking, and Bale's just like, damn it.
Yeah. That's what I was referring to, 20 minutes ago, right?
Right. Even if the clones themselves, became more heroic and whatnot, it's still like, oh shoot, we took the step.
But they're a violent army that kills things. I mean, they ask a separatist, the clones' heroes. Count Dooku was a visionary.
Exactly. Although, in a weird way, I feel like, and to be fair, this is because we don't know a lot. We almost overemphasize the idea of like the Republic just got rid of its military. I feel like New Republic, even just by Ahsoka and even by Hux's speech, of like, there is a fleet, and I do think that fleet, if one-on-one against the First Order, the Republic could have defended itself. And Mon Mothma also wanted to build defense, local defenses as well, like mini armies for every planet, which I guess is sort of inspired by the High Republic.
Yeah.
And there's also some source books that kind of flesh out the sequel era that say that's why we had that fleet come to Exegol. Like there was a lot of local defense forces that just sort of stepped in and kind of gathered around and unified and kicked the First Order. But
that's just it, though. Is there all these local planetary defenses, the New Republic fleet, there's a handful of ships hanging around
True,
Hosnian Prime.
but that
Yeah.
does mean Mon Mothma was right, because that saved the day.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And also remember the First Order only ruled the galaxy for 1 year, so
True.
not that impressive. Your comeback scheme, Palpatine, wasn't that impressive. You only took over for 1 year. You had 30 years last time. What happened then?
Yeah.
But you know,
well, what happened? Yeah, I mean, maybe she's right. What happened? There wasn't a standing armor for him to take advantage of, but also he presumed in people's self-interest and fear, and that just didn't happen.
Yeah, so you know, the Republic, the First Order didn't really have much of a leg. It's kind of hollow at the end of the day, and it's kind of won by blitzkrieg. So you know, there's that. So you know, we talk about the failure of the New Republic. Got destroyed, but what replaced it only lasted a year. So kind of, and who knows what's going to happen? You know, we don't know what's going to happen next for all we know. So that's for the next set of storytellers or story group to kind of figure out, and who knows what they fleshed out.
I mean, it's going to be. I think it's exciting. It's going to be even more local.
Yeah.
All the institutions are gone.
Right. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Yeah. But yeah, there's definitely a fleet. You know, we see it in the Ahsoka trailer. There's a pretty good chunk fleet. You know, there's a Mon Cala thing. So
yeah.
Ultimately, you know, I do think Mon Mothma made the right calls.
Yeah.
So let's talk about something that I do know about the New Republic, though, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot about the Rebel Alliance. That the last great rebel organization in the galaxy pre the Rebel Alliance were the Separatists. They were the largest, most organized. I mean, they had businesses to help them. So you know, counter Republic group ever. And you know, for every Count Dooku in the Separatist leadership, I'm sure there were lots of genuine people who were like, yeah, this darn core Republic, let's kick its butt. But I found what's interesting about when the Rebel Alliance is kind of fully formed, and most of the main Rebel cells, they're all Republic people at the end of the day, or ex-Imperials, right? Like Mon Mothma was a senator, Bail Organa was a senator, Draven and Dodonna, they were Republic/Imperial people. Because obviously, if you're an Imperial officer, there's a good chance you probably were a Republic officer too. You had, you know, even Saw Gerrera, like he had no love for the Separatists. So I do think it's kind of
brought up as an anti-separatist, right?
Yeah, you know. So I do think it's interesting that we haven't seen anything go deep into it. I would love to see it. Of like, how did Mon Mothma and her ilk try to kind of keep the kind of like, hey, we know Separatists, we're not the Empire. We understand your plight, and we're not we're not the Separatists. But we're not the Empire, so we want to integrate you. You know, Mon Mothma, another thing, she very much did not want planets to join in by force. You know, it's like, hey, if you don't want to join, you know, don't join. You know, even Ryloth was like an independent planet. They're not going to force Navarro to join either. It's like, yeah, you do you. But I do wonder, it's like, a Rebel Alliance that is mostly Republic people or just in general. You know, like I do wonder, like, was there anyone in Republic High Command that was, you know, arguing with Leia? Count Dooku was the best rebel leader we had. If Count Dooku were rebel,
Count Dooku was a visionary.
If General Grievous were in charge, he kicked some of these stormtroopers to the hill. And you know, most of the people fought Count Dooku and the Separatists. Even radicals like Saw, who would do some stingy things, were like, nah, I still hate Count Dooku too. So that's something I think about as well.
I mean, part of the problem there is an out-of-universe thing of the good guys during the Clone Wars. You know, they're the Republic, and so we want to continue that. I mean, that's Saw's whole thing. We're cheering for we're cheering for that group and Steela and everything Anakin and Obi-Wan are training them to do. And then, of course, we gotta keep cheering for Saw until we don't. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, especially there, because that's the thing. There's always going to be folks out there who just any kind of thing called a republic, any kind of institution, central thing,
Mhm.
you know, Chandrila, Coruscant, Hosnian Prime, doesn't matter. I mean, the Republic has a presence on Coruscant, clearly. They control Coruscant by the time of the Mandoverse. The people are just
Right.
not going to be interested in that. So, I mean, that's another thing why there's this continuity throughout. I mean, going back to the Nile and going back to what Leslie Helen was saying. And yeah, who knows how many of them end up giving up? Well, not giving up, but saying, okay, recognizing you're right. This is something different, something new. I mean, there's lots of room to play in that, and there's lots of, that would be a really interesting Claudia Gray story to see how much of the populists were separatists that realized, okay, we can do better if we actually join this republic thing, but if we can make sure we can preserve our planet's independence and the right to decide for ourselves what to do. And so,
Then
yeah, I mean that's I guess what we're hitting on is we don't know enough, but
and actually you brought up a great point, and it's something I think about. This is something I think actually Star Trek did a little bit better in terms of what the Federation is versus the New Republic. Although I think the New Republic also does this in certain stories, just doesn't always do it consistently. Is it like a European Union thing where you can join, but you gotta have our shared values? Because
yeah.
in Legends, and I guess even in canon, I guess to a certain extent, you know, Coruscant was pretty pro Imperial world by the end. I mean, see, Coruscant's kind of messed up. When you get these different planets, you get these different values. In Legends, when the Galactic Alliance came, or just the New Republic was being made, more old Imperial worlds, because there was more of a distinction of an Imperial world. Like, oh yeah, these guys are like, they're very much in the Empire. You get these senators now during the New Republic Senate. They're like, them dating alien Wookiees stealing our gerbs. But back in the olden days, if it's Shangela and Moncala and Alderaan, the asteroid of Alderaan by Port Leia. These are planets that have these kind of more egalitarian, democratic values. Although I guess Shangela these days is kind of a bit more, a little more interesting, at least according to Andor.
Although that's said earlier too, but.
That's true. But, maybe, so it's sort of like, I also wonder, but also I also wonder in terms of like the way Canon's setting up the whole fall of the Empire, the people aren't just, taking out the Empire, they're taking out the local leaders, the local, it's like, historically these big empires wouldn't just, they install their governors, but they make deals with local chiefs who would be willing to like, completely trample on their own people and stab people in the back, puppets. So, these normally democratic planets overthrow their local leaderships that are only legitimate because of the Empire, and then kind of restore their more valued leadership back on the power. So I do wonder if planets that were, I guess I'd say asking is, like Star Trek, do you think, I wonder how, I would love to see if there's like a commonality of values New Republic planets need to have before joining, or is it just kind of like, anyone can join. It's an economic thing. You get your benefits and you get protection.
Yeah.
Kind of so
get your friends with benefits.
Friends with benefits and pocket money. It doesn't matter that you are the supreme dictator of the planet. You can join and your senator can be part of the Senate. I'm just kind of curious, Matthew.
Well, so where my mind goes then back to is what we see the difference between the Mandoverse and Bloodline, for example, is the Republic is actually, it's just a lot smaller than the Empire. It's a lot smaller than the late Republic. It's probably smaller than the High Republic because they're just starting something new and starting out. And yeah, we don't know, but if Mon Mothma says it's voluntary membership, what we see, for example, in Princess and the Scoundrel, is Leia having to go to these planets and say, "Can you please join us? Can you come on board? Can we have your resources? We'll trade, and it'll be it'll be this economic arrangement with with it needing to have this regulation in terms of democratic norms as well. But yeah, she has to convince, and not everyone's going to be convinced, and some people are. It's the people who are convinced are meant to be there and want to be there, and are willing to buy in, literally and otherwise. Yeah, it is. I mean, again, it comes down to it's both again, but yeah, I mean, I can imagine at least for a good chunk of the time, and probably even for most of it, there is this voluntary association. Again, I think it's this unique situation where, well, here's the parallel, right? And Joel, you might quibble on that parallel, but the empire was so horrific that it jolts people into a sense of moral courage afterwards, and saying, okay, we actually gonna support these democratic norms and support common norms of international law and cooperation, and both economic as well as labor standards and environmental standards, and having this Security Council where we regulate and say, no, you actually can't go invade this other planet. That's the parallel with the UN, right? And after World War II, especially. And
Well, we try. We try.
yeah, we try, and that's just it. Is we're coming, we're twice the time frame after the UN founding as the First Order coming in with the at the New Republic. So, I mean, for a good the UN had a good run, and there's still it does a lot well, and there's still a sense of international cooperation among wealthier Western countries. And so maybe there's the parallel that all the core planets, they're all gung ho for democracy and for the New Republic. But and some of them are debating, okay, do we develop the Outer Rim? Do we develop it for what end? So that we can have access to the resources, kind of like the Marshall Plan. Was that kind of both tit for tat and exporting democracy? Or, are we going to develop it to have access to exploit, or just ignore it? Again, part of the problem is Mom Mothma is dealing with is the limits. Is just there isn't, if it be so much easier to command a legion of stormtroopers to go and invade this planet and take the resources and force them to be part of this democratic institution, but then that would defeat the purpose. Something that kind of brings back to Dooku in Tales of the Jedi. How he goes against there's this corrupt townsperson, the corrupt senator, and Dooku goes against the Jedi code and the morality of the Jedi in order to force this guy down. And Qui-Gon says, having none of it. Padawan Qui-Gon, what can he do? I guess he's a newly named Padawan Qui-Gon. What can he do? But he's having none of it. Similar type of thing in a larger scale, I can imagine. So is that gets me to thinking, though, and this is something I've thought of quite a bit. We see in the High Republic the presence of the Jedi and how important they are, and how it's not like they're beholden to the Republic, but there's just this much. I mean, this is the before image. There's clearly a much stronger cooperation, but also clearly people want that, and people want, I'm trying not to get on a soapbox here, but people believe in the Force, and if you believe in the Force, and if you believe in the Force and you're in the core world, that means you trust the Jedi, for better and for worse, right? I mean, that's the parallel with most of European history, right? If you believe in God, you trust in the church, even if you're the king, especially if you're the king or whoever, local baron or any kind of people of any kind of class. And that there was the sense of the monasteries holding society together in that way, and gathering people and calling them to a higher moral standard, whether or not they followed themselves, whether or not that was at all effective. Mm-hmm. Where the Jedi and the New Republic, and that's the thing. I mean, I wonder.
I mean, we did.
I mean, where they are is the legend of Luke Skywalker. Is this kind of, I mean, they've been wiped out, but where's the movement? What I mean, it's almost the tragedy of Luke going off and doing his own thing, and that's the thing that comes out in, it's not in Shadow of the Sith. It's in it's in Princess and the Scoundrel when Luke is trying to sort out what his involvement in this New Republic is going to be. There's an opportunity there for, I mean, Leia as well, but for the wisdom of the Force to actually guide events more explicitly. The way Chancellor So would go to the Jedi Council and say, what are you going to do here? What are you guys going to do? Again, that's problematic and complicated, but I think in the smaller scale of Luke, Leia, and Mon Mothma, I think there might have been an opportunity or something, and so.
But there's an interesting to use Legends as sort of the example, in Dark Empire. We talked about this on our podcast. Where in Dark Empire, even though it's only 5 years when Palpatine comes back and pretty much does through the New Republic what the First Order does, except the leadership lives. Mon Mothma's still alive, and a lot of those cats are still alive. But where basically he just takes back the galaxy. Palpatine's all like, without the Jedi, the Republic can't defend itself, And then by the end of Palpatine's defeat, Luke's like, all right, time to get to work. I'm going to rebuild the Jedi Order. And in canon, at least, it seems like Luke's certainly taking his sweet time rebuilding the Jedi Order. Sure. And the weird thing, and the thing I don't quite understand about Luke's motivation is, at least in Legends, it happened a little quicker because Luke was like, "Hey, you're 20, but you got force powers. Hey, you want to join my Jedi? Hey, Mark J, you know how to use a lightsaber and that stuff. Want to join my Jedi Order? We're going to go Yavin because lots of fun. He's not just like waiting for like birds. He's just like, hey, is that the Force user? Want to join? He's not like, hey, you survived the purge. Want to rejoin the Order? Order's back.
Just take whoever, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like that's how he got from like at least 1, 2 technically because Leia was a little more into the training. To like 20, and then he had his niece and nephew to help out eventually, and it's like, hey, pick up any Force sensitive strangler you can find, bring them all here. We can at least get to 100 at our height. Luke's Jedi Order never got to like 10,000, but 100 is pretty good to help get along.
100 for 100 Jedi, that's a lot.
Mon Mothma very much was like, yeah, Luke, we want to help rebuild the Jedi Order too. So. That is something canon's very much stretching out in terms of Luke's Praxium Academy didn't seem to really get its footing until 20 years later. And even then, it seemed like there were only 20 Jedi at best, and they were all Padawans. I don't know if Luke had any like adult Force users helping him out. I mean, maybe they'll retcon it where they say Luke had more people than we realized, and wasn't the total wipeout. Total wipeout. That is sort of interesting. It's like right now there is only one Jedi around. That's Luke, and I guess he wants to be more cautious in terms of starting a Jedi Order for sure.
I mean, what I wonder is, and someone would need to be thinking about this and actually write that story, is to say the distrust of the Jedi during the Clone Wars that developed during the Clone Wars, that stuck. That and that they then become this old memory, this foggy memory of this thing that happened back then. Kind of the way a lot of Western Christianity is today. That is how it is. Not so much distrust and hatred, but it's just irrelevance and apathy, and maybe that's closer to what canon is pushing at and driving at. I want to see a story that really grapples with maybe Ahsoka will. Maybe that's the story that really grapples with what does it mean for there to be a republic without the Jedi, and why is that desirable and why is that wanted? Why does there just not seem to be an interest in even Ahsoka wrestling with reforming the Order for herself? We must begin again. or not, um, having that influence. I mean, that's Luke in The Last Jedi. I mean, he's definitely completely there. He distrusts the Order, and he is one. And so, uh, yeah, there's that. But I want to see someone take that question more seriously, directly tackle it head on, and not just assume. Because I'm concerned again. I keep bringing this up. I'm concerned. You can tell a story of people with perspective. Jedi were corrupt and wayward and did not ultimately failed in their mission to uphold peace and justice in the galaxy. You can tell that story, but tell it with some nuance and some in-depth questioning and more realism than simply that they're the villains. Clearly, I mean that's Rey's arc is realizing this is kind of what Luke has built up in his own mind for the last number of years. And so, I mean, that's the thing, is another place that question could be answered is Rey reflecting on learning about the past few decades,
sort of,
and saying, okay, well, in my new community, we are going to be more present in the galaxy. I don't know.
I always found that sort of the big thing about why I love Rian Johnson, why I think he got George Lucas better than most, because like Luke Skywalker is, to go back to some of our previous conversations, Luke Skywalker is that Gen Xer who kind of took the Jedi are the problem, and at the end of the day, they're like, the movie comes down very much to like, no, Luke, you're just complaining. Stop whining. Stop whining and stop being nihilistic, Gen Xer. Sorry, Gen Xers, that you're out there listening. I don't want to paint you all with the brush, but it's sort of true. It's like Luke Skywalker very much is that kind of character of that kind of generational, like there's a joke of like, the reason why, the joke is, the reason Luke feels that way because he saw the prequels, and that's the conclusion he came
saw
to.
The prequels.
And ultimately, if you pay attention to the movie, like the movie's like, no, Luke, you're wrong. You missed. You watched the prequels wrong, and Rey
I was
did
gonna
not.
say he had Dave Filoni walk him through the prequels. Filoni had to say in what happened in The Last Jedi, right?
I don't think so. I just think he was there to learn directing.
Okay,
I don't think he was.
He was around, and not that Filoni believes that either about the Jedi, but he goes in that direction a little bit.
I definitely think Rian Johnson understood what Lucas was getting at.
Yes,
probably
absolutely.
there the most.
Absolutely.
And
Last Jedi is a perfect film, guys. Just putting that out there.
No, I very much am kind of curious, and that's why I love Luke Skywalker's thing. It's just like, why did he take so long? Like, why is he kind of did he let adults join? Is he only training kids like George was talking about in his version of like, we're gonna find them Jedi babies. Maybe, and where are at least there's got to be 100 Order 66 survivors. If there are 10,000 Jedi and 99% of them are wiped out by the time of Return of the Jedi, that still leaves 100. And it's a big galaxy. If you want to treat it like a big galaxy, sure. They're probably scattered everywhere, but
and some have completely given up. But
once the Empire is officially gone, you don't think some might come out of the woodworks and like, are we safe? Or they're going to Inquisitor at the back of my, it's like they would hear whisper, like, and they either, two things. Either they hear whispers of Luke Skywalker, and old lady Ree was like, "Oh my God, a Skywalker, run for the hills." Last time a Skywalker got involved, wasn't good for any of us.
True.
Or they're just like, "What's the heck is going on here? What's this Luke kid doing?" Did they help out?
And Ahsoka, we remember Ahsoka. She was great.
Yeah, I mean, Ahsoka knows about Luke's praxium and making. She doesn't want to help out, but she knows about it. She clearly got some issues with Sabine that she got to work through, apparently. But what is going on with the New Republic and the Jedi during Luke's entire run? I mean, obviously the New Republic's like Jedi ban, and obviously even in Legends they didn't set up a temple on Coruscant. That's because they didn't know Coruscant had a temple, or that was even a thing back then. So there's the outer universe reason, but Luke in canon, it's like, I'm going to set it here on a different planet.
Yeah,
I forget what the planet was. It's Dark Empire planet 2. Ossus. So
Ossus. Yeah,
Ossus. So
Yeah, I mean, it's symbolic, right? I mean, it's also symbolic of the Jedi not having pretensions to power.
Right.
There's that. I mean, and that's part of the recognition that Jedi pretensions to power help form the Empire. So, yeah, that's kind of what I was
Right.
getting at. But
So, kind of looking at my notes here, we
mhm.
talk about the one and only Mon Mothma herself. I mean, we kind of gone over her chancellorship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, uh, this is very much a continuation of Legends. I mean, Legends is what really made Mon Mothma the first leader of the New Republic. Very much a thing that we've just continued because it's just a thing we do. But kind of like, don't
Mm-hmm.
fix what ain't broken. And Mon Mothma is like,
Yeah.
she was the head of the Rebel Alliance. She became the head of the New Republic as its chancellor. But probably is that kind of that quasi George Washington. Well, she's our kind of compromise candidate anyway. So
Yeah, a little bit
not
of
like
that.
anyone
Yeah.
else wants the job at the moment, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's always that.
I mean,
And
I think
obviously,
Villachem in the Aftermath trilogy, Villachem, or no, maybe that's Bloodline. One of them is kind of around too, but
I know
yeah,
there was a challenger to Mon Mothma,
yeah,
um, in Bloodline that
yeah.
didn't that lost at the end of the day.
No, Challenger is Mon Mothma still around during Bloodline? Why do I think
I, I think so.
probably?
I think she just see. I always get mixed up because
Yeah.
in Legends she got ill and died by poison.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's been too long since
in
I've read that book, I should say.
in Bloodline, she definitely retired. I think
Mm-hmm.
she might have been ill as well. I don't think she
Yeah.
was like in good health,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah. I know
it's always kind of
in
weird.
Empire's End, there's some she has some political rivals, I mean, in part connected related to that the push for militarization or not. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So,
I
anyway,
mean, this is the transition from
mobilization.
rebellion to republic, where it's like
Mhm.
rebellion you can't really. I'm sure there's always rivalries and
Yeah.
disagreements, and there's we see that one dude who's like, we Empire, the rebellion's finished, we got to give up, they got a Death Star, surrender.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like, well, we can't really squabble among ourselves, we're gonna get killed.
Mhm.
And then when we're actual government, it's like, ooh, I can be president, I want that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's weird thinking of Mon Mothma getting older, and because like Jennifer Riley's like she's so young and so
Yeah.
vibrant. It's like compared to like Return of the Jedi, it's actress who's like she got a little bit more wrinkly,
Yeah.
a little older. But yeah, Mon Mothma becomes the Chancellor, quickly restores the Senate. Kind of quickly, which I guess she kind of wants to show, hey, we're not the Empire.
Yeah.
Like even though the war is still going on, kind of technically it's still chaos. It's like kind of want to quickly like, no, we got the democratic procedures. I am not the all powerful chancellor with emergency powers anymore.
Mhm.
The Emergency Powers Act is no longer involved. Kind of a situation. Demilitarizes quickly, or at least wants to. I think there's a little bit of confusion of like, oh, we're demilitarizing right away because they send the fleet to Jakku. It's a pretty good fleet too.
Well, but that's the thing is the fleet's there. Probably it was the rebel fleet that just transitioned over. It's just that it needed Senate authorization to really mobilize on that scale, and it takes like 2 or 3 votes, and my Mothma, she loses the vote the first few times for mobilization, and then like and it's and Chuck Wendig writes it brilliantly as this surprise for the reader too. I remember that. I remember like, what? She lost the vote? Oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Yeah. And I mean that raises questions about pacifism versus just war versus whatever. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
I mean, pacifism is all great, but when you got the entire Imperial Armada waiting for you, it's like I don't think they're gonna just be nice and say,
You gotta have
go
things
away.
to take care of.
Yes. But yeah. What was I gonna say?
Suspending my moral disbelief. There it is. That too.
I mean, sometimes you do just gotta fight to fight. No one's there. Not really gonna be nice about it. Quickly, once the Empire is gone, or at least not a major military threat anymore. Probably does demilitarize. There is a fleet. There are bases. Clearly, we see them. Um, you know, and the whole local defense forces thing. I've always found interesting. The High Republic, I feel, kind of retroactively adds a little bit more. It's like that's how military engagements in the Republic of old was like, where it's like different defense fleets would get together and they kicked them out. But
well, that's just it. I mean, that's the thing about the Grand Army of the Republic, is the aberration, right? That's the weird thing, is what's this clone army doing, being mobilized across the galaxy? What are all these massive ships? Who paid for those things? How is the Chancellor allowed to do this? Is it legal? I will make it legal. That's the thing, is we're so used to seeing on screen this central institution having all these soldiers in white armor, and be it the Republic or the Empire. Yeah, I mean, for most of the galaxy, it's local armies, local fleets, and the Jedi. And that's the debate, interestingly enough, set up in Rising Storm. Senator Tiatun, remember this very clearly. He was getting concerned that the Jedi were just having too much widespread influence, and not that he disliked the Jedi, but taking too much responsibility for planetary defense and for security, when fleets, here's the subsidiarity point again, fleets that and security forces that actually know their planet, know their environment, know their people, should be tasked with defending them. I mean, you see Naboo having a very peaceable security force, not very effective, except when this kid named Anakin actually obeys Qui-Gon and stays in his cockpit. But yeah, I mean, another thing that needs to be fleshed out with this New Republic is we're going back to that now with the New Republic. We're going back to these planetary fleets. It's interesting, of course, what we see on screen in the Mandoverse is we have Carson Teva, all these X-Wings. Of course, he needs this authorization to go and investigate, go back to Coruscant, and he's stopped by what's his name's agent? What's her name?
Elia Kane.
Yeah, stopped by her, but yeah, I mean, it's
just random bureaucrat dude too.
Yeah, and these random bureaucrats who are just not interested in mobilization for multiple reasons. So, yeah, it's
it's interesting. The thing about the New Republic, it's like if Luke had got that Jedi Order up and running quicker, because I always say the New Republic had more of a centralized military than the Old Republic did, for sure. It looks like it. Yeah. They had like the way I've always kind of interpreted the New Republic fleet. They're kind of like Starfleet, I guess. They kind of have that Starfleet kind of, I guess. Yeah. They're not a huge military, but they're certainly a centralized force that can, send out forces and whatnot.
But they're very intentionally inept, intentionally not meant to have that big presence throughout the galaxy. I mean, what we see with Matt Lanter's character and the prison ship, poor guy, they're meant to intentionally inept. I mean, that's the thing. Din Djarin says they're a joke. Yeah, they're not trying to be serious about being a beefy military. They're trying to be
because in the Empire days, like see a Star Destroyer over every planet, and like, oh shoot.
Yeah, so they're trying to move away from that. So, and they're trying to do that. I mean, that's the thing we haven't seen enough of. They're trying to do that through economics. Leia Prince of Alderaan, not Leia Prince of Alderaan. Princess and the Scoundrel did a great job trying to do it through. That's the thing about a legislature and a representative legislature. Ideally, the idea of the Congress of the United States, the idea of the Parliament of Canada, or whatever, the idea of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, Westminster, was that everyone would send a representative and they'd be gathered in Parliament assembled. Ideally, it doesn't really work very well in practice necessarily. In some ways it does. I mean, you have this person. I know if I have a problem with federal government, I can go down the street and knock on my MP's office and say, hey, can you help me figure this out? Probably won't do very good, but I can go do it. I can do something, and I know, so it'll be interesting to see more stories like that. That's the thing, is I want to see more political stories of, maybe it won't be Star Wars enough. I don't know, but of the New Republic actually struggling and trying to make a difference in the galaxy. And it'll still be, I mean, here's the thing. It'll still be the underdog versus the institution. It's just that the institution is the lack of institution. It's the lack of political will to actually have institutions that bring people together. And the thing is, it isn't just going to be a state institution. And that's the thing, that's a huge thing that's missing, that I think maybe someone like Padme, for example, really started to, you have Padme in E.K. Johnson's stories, for example, and also in Legends, NGOs, non-state actors, or, Alderaan. It's sort of a state actor, but it's a planet. It's not like Republic or the Empire. They're basically an NGO at this point, with hereditary monarchy. But yeah, I want to see it. I want to see stories like that, because that is actually somewhat realistic in terms of how democracies function.
Be nice for a couple one-shot books in the New Republic era. Yeah. That'd be nice. I feel like that's the best place to get it, and probably the best place to explain it.
Because people don't think about it on Disney Plus. I get that.
Well, then I just think like you get more into depth about how this whole thing works. What was I had a point. But kind of go back to something else I said, and kind of the reconciling bloodlines with Mandoverse.
Yeah.
One of the reasons they couldn't help out Navarro, because Navarro wasn't a member, and the one guy says, hey, we're having trouble keeping our own planets safe from pirates.
Right.
Which again, it's kind of that interesting thing. It's like in Bloodline, it's like, oh, New Republic's actually pretty stable, more or less. Like they got the peace and prosperity. Yet Mandoverse is like, no, your New Republic planets are having trouble with pirates. I mean, again, I can feel like, oh, it's still the early years, so they eventually get a hold of, they get their act together. But again, I mean, and it makes sense though, because like that was the Empire. It's like, we're not a part of the Empire. Empire, like, we don't care. You're not part of the Empire. Star Destroyer, here you go. We're gonna park ourselves.
You're part of the Empire now. You'll
this religious city for tens of thousands of years, probably always independent. Empire's like, nope. You belong to us. We're gonna park our Star Destroyer over your nice little city, and then we're gonna make you our test subject for our plant-killing weapon. Because we can.
Well, we're gonna take all your kyber first, but
yeah, we gotta do all that. Your kyber's our property. Another thing I always found kind of weird in canon, and maybe they just didn't want to go this direction because it was like Legends, and maybe just make it a little too easy, is, I'm kind of surprised Mon Mothma never groomed Leia for succession, because that's what happened in Legends, where, Mon Mothma's like, okay, she didn't like appoint Leia the chief of state of the New Republic in Legends, it's still democracy, but she's very much like, of all the candidates for, my successor, I very much like Leia. And then that's, that sort of poll of like, oh, okay, well, the senators like vote for Leia. It's like, okay, well, if Mon says Leia is her candidate, so vote for Leia. I'm always kind of shocked that never happened. And I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, maybe because they want to save Leia for different stories now.
That's true.
Maybe now that the films are the films are done, they can go into and figure that out. I mean, what if? I mean, you see Luke having that hesitancy to be a part of things. What if? What if Leia was as well? To some extent. I don't know. I mean, we have the whole. She's the daughter of Darth Vader. I mean, that's the whole smear campaign that comes out during Bloodline. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, what is it about Leia? Why doesn't Leia get groomed for it? Maybe she was just implicitly. I think there's a little bit of that, but also we've gotten again a bit of that story with Prince of the Scoundrel. That Leia is Mon's representative on this Transjorla star line to these planets on her honeymoon. unfortunately, but not the best way to spend a honeymoon. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's a little bit of that, but also, I mean, it's kind of like Luke with Grogu. Got to choose your path and got to find your path, and yeah, but also, I mean, maybe she's concerned not to have too much undue influence over of the future affairs and trying to handpick her successor because she has other allies. She has to build more a coalition. So Mon Mothma does, and so she favors Leia. That might be problematic, but again, we see what happens, right? We see how Leia ends up struggling in Bloodline because of the smear campaign. Because of just I think a lack of will on Leia's part. I mean, what we see opening up, I think part of I think Joel, this is maybe reading ahead in your notes here. What you're speculating here is, that push to go and confront the First Order. That's Hera, and then that's also Carson Teva, and it's Leia, and maybe there's a bit of a rift between Leia and Mon Mothma, and saying, like I keep coming back to the conversation in Life Debt, right? This rift of saying we have to be like a rebellion and go and confront this problem. And Mon Mothma says, no, there are procedures and there are standards and there are constitutionally entrenched regulations and ways to and checks against this kind of thing, because that could easily become imperial. Whereas Leia's, no, this is anti-imperial. What are you talking about? And maybe not a personal rift so much as just a definitive difference of opinion. I don't know.
No, I mean, Mon Mothma has every somewhat potential to be just as much the antagonist. Maybe not the Ahsoka series. I don't know how much of she could be involved, but of the kind of the Mandoverse storyline in terms of just not getting with the program. I see it one of two ways. Either she is blocking whatever needs to be done for the heroes, or, if they kind of want to keep Mon Mothma as more of a positive, she's sort of like, well, I can't help you legally, but I know a guy who knows the guy off the books. Here you go.
And maybe that's more what happens. And then Mon Mothma takes the political hit for it, or the narrative hit for it, by appearing to be unhelpful when, behind the scenes she actually is. I mean, that's, Hux saying that the resistance is aided by the Republic. I mean, that's just a propaganda fiction. But
unofficially, there's Leia's got her senator friends who are giving her
what if Mon Mothma becomes one of them secretly?
Yeah. But
publicly, they have to have this feud in order to protect the rest of the Republic.
That's true.
Speculating on these things.
But to speculate, let's kind of wrap it up with our final point of the day. Why are New Republic stories so far the way they've been? Why they shook out? So I think the biggest reason, in all honesty, is most of these post-Endor immediate stories aren't Luke, Han, and Leia stories, where in Legends they were always Luke, Han, and Leia stories. Always Luke, Han, and Leia stories. They were always the stories of the characters in the ivory towers, either the characters, either the makers and shakers, how do we rebuild the galaxy after
the Thrawn trilogy is a Luke, Han, and Leia story.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a Thrawn story.
Yeah, it is a Luke, Han, and Leia story, kind of dealing with Thrawn. While so far Mandalorian, Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, they are about really the most bootiest boots on the ground. These are civilians. They're going, Din is rising to become a hero in his own right and probably will be involved in big events. But he starts off as, he's just regular dude who has no impact on anything, on anyone.
I mean, the Aftermath trilogy is a Wexley story.
Right.
Primarily, for example.
Kind of a little different because they have the more tangential to the New Republic for sure. While Ahsoka is, she's doing her own thing, and these kids, they're children. What are they going to make political decisions?
You never know.
You never know. So I think there is that. I also think it is that generational thing that we
Mhm.
talked about, where in the '90s, the Cold War had ended. So I think in a lot of ways there was a little bit kind of like Star Trek, were kind of where
Mhm.
it's very much that, oh, New Republic America, we did it. America won the Cold War, we beat the commies, the
Interesting.
empires of the commies. You know, that's what they're interpreting. There was a lot of EU interpretations, even if they didn't go with what maybe what George wanted. So there's kind of that, America won.
Yeah.
So when the good guys come in, it's the New Republic, kind of kick some Imperial butt. Admiral Akbar is on the chair doing the things. There's sometimes a no good general trying to take down our heroes from the inside. Um, but there's that where now it's sort of the kind of an era where we question institutions a lot more.
Mhm.
There's a lot more younger authors and writers who are very much more, government's not going to come save us.
Mhm.
Uh, and I don't want to get into like, I don't want to get like, oh, no vote or anything like that. But it's sort of like, real organizing comes from, local communal groups and whatnot,
Mhm.
from the bottom up kind of a situation, where you see kind of more in the Gen Z, millennial, um, different types of ways of resisting imperialism. Like we're kind of probably going to see it in the Filoni film and in Rebels. I mean, Ahsoka, Rebels season
Mhm.
5,
Yeah. Good.
where
Yeah.
Hera probably gonna go rogue and break rank, and like
That'd be
um,
interesting. Yeah.
where it's like I can't get Mon to approve of hey, the Thrawn, you know. Even right now, Carson Teva's like kind of unofficially like,
Mhm.
well, this Mando guy, I can kind of off the books maybe like tap into some New Republic credits, and he can help me find these Imperial remnants.
Yeah.
Um, so that is those are kind of like my two big things. Of one, just not a lot of stories about New Republic characters, be it the big wigs like Luke Han and Leia, with a few
Mhm.
exceptions here and there,
Yeah.
and kind of that generational thing that I kind of brought up earlier, where it's just different viewpoints. Um, I wouldn't say though necessarily that that meant um, the New Republic was taken more seriously in Legends. It's just it was. I think honestly, my hot take, if they're both taken as equally seriously, it's
Mhm.
just different perspective and
Yeah.
maybe just a little bit of that kind of generational pull. But outside of that, it's like I mean, as an institution, New Republic always kind of fell again later on. Kind of here, it's like if anything, New Republic did a better job in canon because it didn't get wiped out 5 years by Clone
Sure.
Palpatine.
Yeah.
Took 30 years, but yeah, those are sort of my two big takeaways. If I
Yeah.
just am being my sociologist self for a little bit.
I mean, I don't have that much to add, really. I mean, it's why we haven't. I mean, we're a culture that thinks the lone wolf and cub story is cool, maybe because it's different. Like we're just so used to dealing with. We turn on the news and we see, Biden and Trudeau having a press conference or whatever. Like whatever, it's Biden and Trudeau. It's not like it's Obama, but not like Obama did it was all that great either. He was okay, but he had this story behind him, this Jed Bartlett type story behind him that uh, helped him sweep to power. But he didn't really. He did his best he could, and then after that, look what happened. So we had our Palpatine, and a little bit no orange hair, not very smart, but uh, yeah. I mean, again, not too much to add in terms of um, the belief in institutions. Maybe it's again, it's not so much antipathy but apathy. That's just humdrum and boring. And we don't believe in the West Wing. Uh,
No,
we don't believe in anything as exciting as House of Cards. We don't want that. We get that in with Palpatine to some extent. Um, what's new and different and unusual is this lone wolf and cub in a mask that and this other culture that we're exploring, this maybe more Asian influenced culture that is finally the last season 3 really came to a culmination of, and now we're getting the space wizards, and I'm here for that, of course. But
It's
Yeah,
I'll
it's just we're in the New Republic now. Why do we want to watch stories about us when we're going to Star Wars for? Maybe that's what it is, right? Maybe we go to Star Wars for an escape, and maybe that's the difference between Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Trek, we
I
go to it for not just an escape, but this is what this world could be like. Whereas Star Wars, it's more, let's imagine something else entirely.
yeah.
And they're both. I mean, that they both have the appeal. They both have. I mean, I'm a huge, no, definitely a crossover fan. Have the fan bases, but yeah, I think maybe I'm also just weird. I really do want to see West Wing in space because I love the West Wing. It's fun. It helps me suspend my moral disbelief about everything. Um, and so yeah, it's. So your
No,
question,
I think
maybe they're building up to it. Maybe another thing, lastly, I'll say is they're building up to it, laying the groundwork, giving the Gen Xers what they want with this Lone Wolf and Cub, very original trilogy inspired setting, giving us Clone Wars fans, Space Wizards fans, what we want with Ahsoka, seeding things in, and yeah, I mean it's also again to echo what you said, novels, specifically adult novels, are where the most detailed content for New Republic functioning has come from, both the Chuck Wendig novels and the Claudia Gray novel. Uh, that's where it's where they have the time, and there is maybe a market for that. Even E.K. Johnston, with Palpatine, there's a little bit of this is said obviously 30 years before this, but a little bit of legislative maneuvering that I find fascinating. Maybe there's enough of a book audience for it, but maybe not enough of a Disney Plus audience for it. Sadly, I'm all for just making people watch stuff and pushing through it, enduring through it, because I'm going to truly, deeply love it anyway.
get Tony Gilroy. That's what I want.
Yeah, but again,
Tony
Tony
Gilroy
Gilroy doesn't want to tell stories of senators trying to make a
I
difference.
think he would. I think Tony
Really?
Gilroy would probably. Yeah, I think he could do it. I think he could pull it off.
Well, what he did with Mon Mothma, yeah. I mean, Mon Mothma, but even then, it's a story of, we know this is a story of her giving up, and it's an compelling story, an important story. I just wonder if it's. I'm talking about a story of Mon Mothma then trying to make it work, and that I'm intrigued by, and that's the story I want to see. I want a novel of that by Claudia Gray or James Luceno or whoever. Mon Mothma trying to make it work. That'll be
Well,
fascinating.
yeah, but I think you brought up a great point. Like, yeah, I feel like culturally we've kind of moved beyond the West Wing. I don't think we want House of Cards.
No.
And you talk about aspiration. Yeah, but also you talk about aspirational.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a weird way, younger Gen Zers and millennials, we've kind of gone back to the Lucas way of aspirational, where
and the Gene Roddenberry way. I mean, that's again the thing with Strange New Worlds and Discovery and Lower Decks is it's back in full. Starfleet is the hero.
But I would argue even less so Roddenberry, more Lucas, where it's not going to be the official institutions that say, like most of the time, it's like just normal people rising up and taking down corruption themselves.
Or the Lower Decks, or the ensign. Like ensign or whoever,
So, yeah, like a victory doesn't come within the Senate halls. It comes within the streets or local groups.
With the people who are relatable. I mean, that's, again, the thing with just bringing up the parallel. Well, it's also with, Grogu is relatable. Anyone who has a toddler around. I wonder if, I don't know if Ahsoka and Hera and Sabine are going to be that relatable. But they are in their own way. I mean, we're familiar with them and the family dynamics around that. Skeleton
Sabine Crew will probably be the relatable one.
Yeah, I mean Sabine. This younger character who had all these more adult figures around her, who did inspire her and help raise her, form her, but also didn't fully understand her. We don't know what that conflict is with Ahsoka. Skeleton Crew might be even more relatable. We'll see.
Yeah, but I think a 2-hour mark. I think that will do it. For this week, the New Republic. I guess I'll be kind of curious to see when the movie comes, and obviously we're gonna have the climactic battle. Will that New Republic fleet be in the trenches? Well,
Mhm.
because that's sort of extending it just a little bit, but this has been on my mind for a long time, and I kind of always been thinking about this. You know, and maybe they'll just kind of ignore it because paper can't and screen can't divide. But the whole point of Battle for Jakku was like, okay, we did it, we beat the Empire. But obviously,
Mhm.
if Imperial Remnant comes and Thrawn, I do kind of worry a little bit in terms of the grander narrative of the whole thing. Of
Yeah.
how do you not make the New Republic look really stupid when an
Exactly.
Imperial Remnant 9 years later comes back under a Grand Admiral, and your response is, "Well, now we did it. Thrawn is gone. What?
Yeah.
Like what? You think the Emperor's going to come back as a clone? You're crazy, man. You're crazy."
To be fair, that is a bit of a crazy thing.
That is true, but that's true. But
Take
I
some
am
dark
kind.
arts and cloning, but
I do wonder how they will play it, especially if the New Republic does get involved, and it's not just non-New Republic characters all the time, and maybe Carson Teva, but he's kind of gone rogue.
gone rogue.
Squadron. I mean, I would like that, but if or at best, maybe this is Mon Mothma's Avengers, her Rangers of the New Republic that she's funding off the books. Situation where if the New Republic does get involved, you kind of make them look really. Be crass, look really stupid by a major Imperial force just came back after 5 years, and you're not, and your reaction is, well, keep going. You're not going to be afraid of a Star Killer base after this? I feel like, it's kind of like the Dominion War thing. If the Dominion War ends, is like, okay, your Federation back to normalcy. We're good. We didn't just have a major war that just scarred us for life.
I mean, I think the way they're going to do it is to say, what can we do? We only have so much at hand, and we're not going to raise a grand army. We'll try and build alliances that bring things around. I don't know. I do want them to be. That's the thing. I want a sympathetic Mon Mothma story.
I'll be very curious. I mean, I don't. I'm trying to hesitate on how much Mon Mothma's in Ahsoka.
No, she's not. I mean, I want a novel.
Yeah.
I want someone to dive in and think about these things. I know people are. I know Genevieve O'Reilly's thinking about these things because she has to bring it to her performance. I'm sure Dave Filoni and them have thoughts and ideas. But maybe Christy Golden. Maybe she's written Mon Mothma already really well. Maybe Claudia Gray. We'll see who does.
But yeah, that is our thoughts on the New Republic.
Yeah, and hitting 2 hour mark. We had a lot to say. We had more to say than we thought we did. That's all great. That's all good. Thanks everyone for joining us in the comments and online watching. Maybe after the fact, if you found this episode later on, let us know in what you thought of our conversation in the comments below. They are still there on Star Wars Underworld YouTube, on Underworld Facebook, Underworld Twitter, Iron Canon Twitter. Not going to call it the other thing. If you give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the channel, and to follow all those socials if you haven't already. Joel, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at JID2021, JD21, and of course at Ion Cannon Pod, where I will continue to post things and whatnots. Of course, you can also find us on the Star Wars Underworld Discord, and look forward to next month, where we will definitely be watching the finale of Rebels, and maybe a few episodes before, maybe some World Between Worlds, just to kind of get all the important stuff.
Maybe a few episodes of a previous series.
I mean, I would love to, but we gotta have at least I definitely want to do Rebels for sure.
Yeah, okay. I do. I think there's some Clone Wars episodes that are going to be pretty important too, but. We all you don't disagree with that. Anyway, you can find me on Twitter at NEUG485, on Instagram and Threads at MNEUG1138, and of course at Iron Cannon Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at EYEONCANONPOD. Next week we are, as I mentioned, almost nearly at the top. We're talking about Outlaws, Star Wars Outlaws, and probably gonna talk about Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order, and just the whole question of video games and continuity, in multiple storylines, multiple endings, and if there's a canon version or whatnot, and what that might mean for continuity, generally speaking. It can be an interesting discussion. Another probably going to dive more into medium and message and what canon continuity means, as we always do here at the Iron Canon Podcast. But until then, Joel, let's blow this thing and head home.